I'm Barbara Levin. I have the honor of teaching the Washington University Philanthropy Lab class. Welcome to St. Louis. We are proud to host one of the Philanthropy Lab Speakers Series, welcoming students, professors, and alumni from all across the country as part of the Philanthropy Lab network campuses. Just so everyone remembers, there are 34 campuses taking the class. 255 courses have been offered since 2011. Over $19 million have been distributed, excuse me, through about 1,700 grants. So it's a pretty substantial, wonderful network of philanthropists. Today, our discussion today will be with Dustin Palmer, the U.S. Director of Give Directly. We will, his talk will be moderated by Mason Shaver, and then we will be taking Q&A from the class, and then we're opening Q&A to everyone else who's watching. If you'd like to post a question, please go into the Q&A at the bottom of the link, at the bottom of the screen, and post your question, and we'll try to get to them as time permits. Mason is an alum of this class and a member of the Philanthropy Lab's Ambassador Board, who in 2024 led his group there to bring an additional $50,000 to the Red Circle here in St. Louis. Mason is a senior now at WashU, a Questbridge Scholar, Yale Launchpad Scholar, and this past summer a Pershing Fellow, working at the City Academy. He's pursuing a double major in political science and education studies, a native of St. Louis, and aspiring attorney practicing education law to advance equity in education. Mason.
Thank you, Professor. I have the honor of introducing Dustin. Dustin, thank you for being here today. Dustin is the U.S. Country Director for Give Directly, leading more than 150 million in public and privately funded projects, delivering unconditional cash transfer to low-income Americans. Before joining Give Directly, Dustin spent 5 years using technology and design to improve access to U.S. safety net programs at Code for America. He's previously worked on governance and justice challenges in Asia, including as a board member for the Asia Foundation and as a 2016-2017 Luce Scholar in Yangon, Myanmar. Dustin holds a BA in political science from right here at WashU and an MPA from Princeton University. Thank you, Dustin, for joining us.
Thank you, Mason, and thank you everyone for having me. How's the audio? Can folks hear me okay? You can give me like a thumbs up, Mason, if this is working. Can you all hear me?
Hey, Dustin, we're having audio issues on our side. We can't hear you in the classroom. 1 second, we'll fix it.
Cool. No problem. The folks online, it sounds like they can hear us, so not on my side, but we'll wait till we get it set up in the classroom. How about now? Any luck? I'll test again. Can anyone hear me?
It's still not working.
Say something.
How about now? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, we'll jump into it then. Thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Mason, for the really generous introduction. So generous, we broke the audio for a minute, but now we're back, and I appreciate it. It's always hard to hear your own bio in front of a room of folks. I'm super excited to be with you all today. Like Mason said, I'm a WashU alum. I graduated some time ago and just loved my time in St. Louis and was able to speak to a similar class last year. And now I'm really thrilled to be back to talk about one version and philosophy around philanthropic giving that we do here at Give Directly. So I do have some slides to share. We'll cover that for maybe 15, 20 minutes. Then we'll do Q&A with Mason and then broader Q&A and go from there. But I'll just jump right into it. Let's see, are folks able to see the slides? Looks okay on my end.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Awesome. So Mason gave a great and detailed kind of overview of my biography, but I thought I'd just voice over a few of the organizations that have led me to where I am today. I've spent about 15 years working at innovative nonprofits that put end recipients first and that have kind of a delivery practice that's really strong. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I just heard a little bit of feedback, but I'm gonna keep going and give me a shout if anything's off. But through my career, I've interacted with the nonprofit sector in a number of ways, and almost there's always a philanthropic component to the giving. And so I've seen lots of different models of delivering value and public good and different funding models to back up that effort. There's just a short list here. I'm happy to kind of go deeper on any of these experiences in Q&A. But what I'm excited to chat about for the bulk of this talk today is Give Directly. If I were in person, I'd ask if anyone's heard of Give Directly before. You could raise hands if you would like, but I'll assume at least one person has not. And so we are a global nonprofit. We've been one of the leaders in delivering what we call unconditional cash transfers. So it's kind of what it sounds like. We give money directly to low-income people around the world, and we don't have conditions tied to it. So it's not like you have to do something in particular to receive the money, and there's very few restrictions. Don't use it on illegal things or to do harm. But our philosophy is that people really know how to solve their problems the best, and the best way to do that is to put them in a position to have that dignity to pick their path. We've started about 15 years ago. Over that time, we've grown rather dramatically. We've worked with some of the largest philanthropic and foreign aid and government partners in the world. We've delivered cash to over 2 million people, and we've crossed $1 billion delivered since that start, mostly working in sub-Saharan Africa, but we also do work for natural disasters all around the world. We were just working in Jamaica and the Philippines in the fall. And the other component that typically folks think about or that can be attractive to donors about Give Directly is this real deep commitment to rigor and transparency. So we're founded by economists, and we have had over 27 randomized control trials of our programs to show the impact. And that's not just because we think that's important for the cash, but when we first started doing this, it was such an unproven model that we wanted to have the most rigorous evaluation component to see if cash works, and it really does, which is why we continue to do it today. I lead up our US work, talked a little bit about kind of our philosophy behind giving cash and why it's such an important component of supporting people and the strong outcomes behind it. But here at home in the United States, where I'm from, where many of you are from, cash is kind of absent in both the way we administer our social safety net, the way our government supports people with programs. Many of the government benefits programs aren't that end point of giving cash to people directly, putting it in their pockets and letting them choose. It's often conditional or in-kind benefits in some way. And we're restricting the spending, and we think that creates a lot of kind of wasted efficiencies in the middle to monitor what people do and only allow them to use it in certain ways. And it ultimately doesn't let people achieve the outcomes that are most important to them because there's just a narrow band that they can use that support. So part of our mission is do the most good we can with dollars that we receive from donors by getting it to people directly, but also kind of having an eye on this wider systems change and how we can generate policy relevant evidence from our programs with kind of gold standards of evidence that can inform how the US safety net and the philanthropic sector supports people. Just last year, we paid around 250,000 people in the US team, the team that I lead. We delivered over $40 million into people's pockets, and then we raised over $100 million, which will be programs that we're implementing now this year. So we raise the money, we give it away, we keep a very minimal program portfolio and footprint. A lot of our programs are remote driven in different ways. And then we have those research publications that are kind of driving that evidence goal. I just want to highlight two programs today to make this a little bit tangible. We'll spend, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes on each. The first is called RX Kids. And this is a great example of how we're seeing cash fit into the existing safety net landscape. And then the second is our disaster responses. So these are in the moment responses when there's a natural disaster that create this moment of need. So first, RX Kids, it's just a bit north of where you all are in the state of Michigan. We have, for the last 2 years, been running a program that is basically what we call a cash prescription. So we do it in partnership with an amazing pediatrician. It started in Flint, Michigan, which is the city with the highest childhood poverty rate in the entire country for a city of its size. And it's also where there was the lead water crisis, if you remember this some years back, that folks people's pipes, the city infrastructure had unbearable amounts of lead that were impacting health outcomes. And our pediatrician partner, Dr. Mona, has said she can write a prescription for a million different things, but she can't write a prescription for cash. The problems her patients are dealing with are poverty at their core, and lack of resources is one of the things holding back their health. So we have a program where we deliver $1,500 during pregnancy and then $500 a month for the first year of the baby's life. This is universal in the communities we're in. So in Flint, where we started, every single mom is eligible. We actually enroll about 99% of eligible moms. We check birth records to make sure we're reaching everyone. A few wealthier moms might decline. They say, I don't need the support, give it to the next person. But it's one of these kind of rare universal philanthropic programs. Last year, we expanded to almost 20 more communities that you can see on the map here. And we've gotten, in the 2 years of the program, we've prescribed around $20 million in cash to over 5,000 families, which is really just terrific. Right now, my team is gearing up. I'll be in Detroit next month because we're launching there. It'll be the largest city in Michigan, and the state is expanding this program with around $250 million investment to say we want moms and babies to have this in Michigan. This is just part of what being a Michigander is. I won't go in depth in this slide. I'm happy to share slides later and you all can poke around on it, or we have a lot on our website too. But we have really significant research around the impact of a program like this. So you might guess that giving people cash reduces financial hardship. That's absolutely true, but it's pretty dramatic. We're seeing a 91% reduction in evictions, which if you think about how important a stable household is at birth for families, it's huge. The pregnancies themselves are healthier. There's been a large reduction in postpartum depression that moms report. They report they can get access to improved prenatal care, and other conditions that can affect the baby and the mom's health are reduced in that prenatal moment. The babiers, the babies are so much healthier. This is the slide that I think is really amazing, kind of even exceeded our hopes, which is that there was a 29% decrease in NICU admissions, the neonatal intensive care units. If your baby's really sick or struggling when they're born, that's where they can wind up for extra care, but it's generally a scary moment to say the least. And it's an almost 30% decrease in that for moms who are receiving this program versus those in neighboring cities and kind of comparable control groups that are not. And that's also in relation to babies that are being born on time and at the right birth weights, which is pretty amazing. And then broadly, there's this kind of multiplier effect. So it's not just that we have $20 million in these communities, but it kind of rolls through the communities, stimulating the economy and jobs. And there's been some really nice community level studies around this, what it does to the local economy. And then if we think about just the reduction in NICU admissions and the associated cost with that, it's basically on par with the cost of the program, just that indicator is. So it's a pretty special program. We'd be happy to chat more about it. I think it's a good example of how cash can kind of unlock these other wider outcomes that people might care about. Even if you really, really care about health it might be the case that giving someone cash who's at a really critical health moment in their life is the best thing you can do, even maybe even better than, whatever you think might be best for them in terms of care or treatment or things like that. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears and talk about disaster response. Again, just trying to give everyone a hook of like the reality of our programs on the ground. Last year, as I mentioned, we reached almost 250,000 people. Here, we also delivered around $20 million in total. And this is a program where it moves extremely fast. So we are trying to be the very first person there to support someone when they go through a natural disaster. This means that in some cases, 2 days after a disaster, we are finding people that we have no relation to in advance, verifying that they suffered damages and impacts from that disaster, that they're low income, and then getting dollars into their pocket so that they can find stable housing, get the care they need, start rebuilding from where they've come from. We did 4 responses in 2025, and I think they kind of speak to the flexibility of this model. The first was in the LA wildfires. Folks, if you can think about a year ago, there were these devastating wildfires in Los Angeles. We reached folks really quickly there with large cash payments to help them get on their feet. And we're working with a payment provider there that offered some great kind of inclusion components. In Western North Carolina, we had done a hurricane response in 2024, if you remember Hurricane Helene and Milton down in Florida. We went back to those communities almost 6 and 8 months later and gave additional cash payments. And it's really interesting. I think what we found is that the impact of the disaster can really knock people off course, and the negative impacts are compounding months and months later. It's not like people can rebound easily. It might kind of send them into a spiral. And so we're really interested in these long-term recovery options. In Texas and the Central Texas floods, we paid families there as well, those who maybe had lost their home in the flood or had other damages. And then finally, if folks recall, later in the fall, there was a kind of man-made disaster where SNAP payments, the food stamp system, ground to a halt for one of the first times ever related to the government shutdown. And people who rely on that and count on it woke up on the start of November 1st and didn't have food assistance in their wallets. And so we did a massive program there where we paid a number of people $50 just a stopgap payment until the SNAP payments could kind of come back alive as our government resolved some things. And that was just in every state around the country. So just a really cool example of us moving really fast. We had dollars in people's pockets the day that their SNAP payments didn't show up, which was really neat. Okay, I'm almost done here. I did want to leave one slide. I gave you a sense of Give Directly as a whole, of some of the programs we have on the US team. I wanted to give just a tiny day in the life slice, because I know folks are thinking about this and have interest in hopefully in careers in kind of philanthropy in the nonprofit space. In my role on our US team, we are part of this global organization, but really we're like a tight, amazing team, almost an independent org of itself. We've got about 25 people right now. And in leading the team, it's really my role to make sure that our leadership and our donors understand the vision and mission of what our team is doing and how it fits into this wider picture of proving that cash works, doing the most we can with every dollar that we get. So that's a lot of delivery and operations and implementation details. Separately, I think as I've kind of climbed in my career in some sense at more senior levels, there's a lot of focus on finances, revenue, resourcing, making sure that we're forecasting our cost and are keeping track of our programs, making sure we're getting ambitious targets of how much cash we're going to get to people each year, and then doing everything we can to convince donors of the value of the work and to show up for recipients. And then broadly, this last category is kind of that vague, like thought leadership bubble. Like I am a spokesperson for Give Directly and my team and all the great work we do, and in second order of the recipients and their stories. And a lot of what we're trying to do is shape and inform this cash landscape, maybe find donors that are open and maybe have supported people directly, but not with cash. That feels like just a little bit too far for them, a little bit too radical. And convince them based on all the evidence we have and kind of recipient stories that it's one of the best bets, and it should be a toolkit within their philanthropic giving broadly. I think that's where I'm going to stop. I dumped a bunch of links in here for more detail on our programs. I grabbed a job description of a program associate role. That would be more the kind of like entry level role in case folks just want to see what we look for when we're hiring. But I know we want to talk more about just like Give Directly as a model and kind of the work that we do broadly. So I'm going to stop there. I think I'll stop sharing my screen. That seems like probably the best. I can go back to it if folks would like as a reference. But thanks for that quick tour through our work. Happy to go more in depth on anything, and I think Mason's going to get us started with a few questions.
Thank you, Dustin, for the presentation and the work you do. Yeah, I have a few questions, then we'll open up to the class and then to the chat. So one of my questions, this is kind of like a two-parter, but how do you convince donors of this radical direct giving model of philanthropy? And then the second part of it is during your time here, have you seen like public opinion around, that model change at all? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mason. Great questions. Challenges I think about basically every day when I wake up. One of our first president would kind of use this anecdote to talk about the model and make it relatable. And he would say, there's this idea or this saying, give somebody a fish, you feed them for the day, teach them to fish, you feed them for the lifetime. And he would say, well, let's like take that to its logical endpoint. Like if you find a hungry person, instead of teaching them to fish for a lifetime, like what if you gave them cash and they could decide if they wanted to become a fisherman, they could take fishing lessons, they could buy a fishing pole, or they could buy a cow and be a farmer. They could move to a city and look for a job there. Like really pursue this radical endpoint of trusting people to take care of their own needs as being the best person to solve it. So I think that's the starting point. And there's a lot of integrity to that. And I think the value of giving directly, it's enough just there to say we believe in dignity and respect of individuals, and giving them money and letting them choose is good on its own. But then we also happen to have this mountain of evidence that people don't waste cash. They don't buy. Sometimes economists will call it temptation goods. Like people will spend money on tobacco or alcohol or any other things that we have judgments about. There's a really really deep literature here that people don't spend it that way. Even recipients themselves, you often hear stigma and judgment over what other recipients might be doing. But if you hear their story, they're like, this helped me, get my child to treatment, or I'm investing in a certificate program to, change my career, or things like that. And then if you talk to the neighbor that they might have some judgments about, they say, oh, I'm using it to replace the roof on my house if I'm in, Malawi or something. And so you do that ring and you realize pretty quickly that people, the vast majority of people are spending the money on productive things that we would never imagine. And so part of with donors is trying to map a little bit to their values, and knowing that you have this kind of normative philosophical case of it's the right thing to do, but also there's a lot. If you're a numbers person, if you're an evidence person, our whole brand is transparency in our financials, in our research findings, and there's a mountain there that you can look at. I'll just go a little deeper on that. We've done a lot of work on what we call cash benchmarking, and so what we're trying to say, in particular for government-funded programs, is the baseline should be giving cash to someone directly, and you should have a really strong theory of change that a different model, like a jobs training program or something like that, will have an impact even greater than cash. So we're not saying cash is the perfect instrument in every single situation a donor might care about. But if you don't have pretty good evidence that you can do better with the thing that you're presuming to help people, default to cash. That's like the idea of what we'd like to do. And a lot of the USAID, the US's foreign aid kind of institution, follows that lead in some of their giving, and that's a bigger conversation on the international giving. Um, yeah, I'll pause there. I mean, I don't know if that gets to your question, Mason, or if you have thoughts too about like how you convince donors about the model, but very open to them. And then we can jump to your second question after that.
Oh, thank you. You answered it. And yeah, it's deep insights in there. Thank you so much. You answered it. My other question is, what was the strategic thinking behind bringing, you touched upon this a little bit, but bringing Give Directly internationally into the US? Because you touched upon like how it started out internationally and now it's came to the US. So how did that all come about?
Yeah, good question. I think this is kind of unique. You saw the places I've worked before, and some of those are US based organizations doing a lot of work overseas. And I think that's great. And I think the world benefits when we share best practices and resources and things like that. it is rare that there are innovations overseas that we bring back into the United States. And I think it's really special that Give Directly is an example of that. I also think now that we do work in the US, there's a lot of integrity of saying the exact same model that we're using in Malawi and Kenya and, Rwanda, wherever else, we're using here too. It's not this thing that we would never do at home. There's a lot of foreign aid schemes and donor schemes that you're sort of like, would you really do this in like the poor neighborhood next to your house in the US? Maybe not. It seems a little bit presumptuous that we have that kind of integrity through line. The kind of interesting like inside ball on coming to the US is our mission as a global organization is accelerating the end of extreme poverty, people making less than like $2 a day, people who may not be able to afford a tin roof or a chicken that can lay eggs to feed their family. That's the really, really dire absolute poverty that's in, for the most part, other parts of the world. Our board was really hesitant to work in the US. They were afraid that it would kind of blur up our brand. It would confuse donors, and really, that's not where the greatest impact was based on the things they value and care about. Um, One of our large donors, a private donor, convinced the board to respond to a hurricane in the US and said, there's a disaster. I will give you money to respond in the Caribbean, but I want you to respond in my hometown of Houston, Texas for Hurricane Harvey. And so the board said, of course, let's try it. And around the same time, a lot of US cities and counties and states got interested in cash. And so what we found is there was this giant market where a lot of appetite to try these programs here. And we were the world's expert in doing it. We had already been around for 8 years or so. And then to the board's kind of nervousness around the brand and things like that, what we found is we were finding all these donors who had never given to the international work, but would give to the U.S. and then converted to give to international. So we kind of found that the U.S. work is a on ramp for net new money. It's not a fixed pie where we're all fighting to spend the money in the US or not. We're actually growing it larger by demonstrating the great work we do here. And we have tons of donors who give both, like people whose donor profiles doesn't constrain to a certain country border. They say, I want most of my money to go to people in extreme poverty, but if there's a wildfire in my hometown in Los Angeles, yeah, I would love to do something for that. And I believe in cash as a way to do that. And that's kind of what we offer as a one of many nonprofits in the US. So it's become really additive in a way that I think even surprised our board a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. No, that is surprising to hear, and I'm surprised by it myself. I guess like the last question I have, and then I'll open it up to the class. But what advice would you give to students here at WashU and students watching on the live stream? I mean, this is our second class, and they're gonna decide how to spend money themselves and how to be philanthropists. So like, what advice would you give them as they decide on a local organization?
Yeah, I love those questions. And I'll say Give Directly does not work locally right now in St. Louis, so I'm not pitching you on us at all. I'll distance from that. I'll be really excited to see where you all land. I think the things, if there's like a special sauce of Give Directly and what has helped me pick the places I'm working in my career where I feel like there's real genuine impact, it's this blend of recipients, which is the people who receive the cash in our terminology. You might call them users or clients or anything like that. But having a genuine link to them and being interested in their stories and their feedback of what's working in a program or not, whether it's a jobs training program or cash or anything like that, I think that's really important as a heuristic for organizations that are doing good work. Like there's a real feedback loop there with the people they serve. And there's a lot of different ways you can center the ideas of people you serve, from kind of lived experience councils to participatory budgeting to just, feedback in, I don't know, spokespeople who talk to you about the program. It's a whole spectrum. I think that's really important when I'm considering, where I do my personal giving. And then the other piece is that rigor and evidence. And I think it's hard for very small organizations. It's expensive to do really detailed studies like that. So you don't want to make that a precondition. It might just bias you to giving to the big orgs, and your marginal dollar doesn't change that much for a giant org, but it could really matter for a new organization. At the same time, I would, want to know someone's thinking really thoughtfully about their dollars doing something against a counterfactual of just a different nonprofit doing it, or nothing happening there at all. Like really a thoughtful sense of kind of the rigor. That's how I would think about giving decisions. Give Directly, and I work there, so I agree with this. We tend to be on the like really rigorous impact measurement. There's an organization called GiveWell that does evaluations of charities. We were one of their main recommended orgs for a long time. We're still on their page for these in-depth, rigorous looks at where your dollar goes, kind of motivated by the effective altruism world and things like that. Um, but I don't think that's the only thing. I think people can give for lots of different reasons. And if you have more of an emotional connection or longstanding interest, like go down that route and look for that recipient voice and the rigor. In terms of, I think the second part of your question was a bit about kind of the career side and where to work. Was that right, Mason?
Not directly, but go ahead. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So it's like, where do you give? And then if you do want to make a career or kind of work in this space, it's pretty similar. Like, I think my advice would be similar. Find the organizations that you really feel have a lot of integrity and trust. Understand who their funders are and what their funding model is. We have a great old blog post you can find that says, like, we have costs too. It's like, we're delivering services. We have cost. You have to be upfront about that. But there can be lots of different revenue models. I'm sure you'll hear about in future classes, from endowments to selling a service in some way to philanthropically driven to government contracts, anything like that. We have kind of a blend of some of those, but it can really define the work that you're able to do in your role.
Thank you so much. Should I just pass the mic even? If that's the best way. Okay. Does anybody have
let's
any
get into
question?
it.
Hi, my name's Chloe. Thank you so much for being here. I was interested in how giving direct cash works between, like, if you're giving in the US versus giving internationally. I'm sure that those are like somewhat different processes, and I was just wondering what that looked like for your organization specifically.
Yeah, good question, Chloe. We there's a lot of nuance underneath it. It's a great question. Give Directly started when the mobile banking revolution was taking off in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. So a lot of people's money management in countries like Kenya, for instance, in a system called M-Pesa, they may not really have a bank account as you and I would think about it, or a credit card as we would think about it, but just on simple phones, not even smartphones, there's banking happening through the telecoms, and then there's agents where you can cash out money, kind of like a human ATM in a way. And that's how kind of the economy functions in big ways. And so that it's an innovation that springs up around the lack of banking, at least 15 years ago. So for our international work, everything we deliver is through those mobile money systems. And we have integrations with mobile money platforms and telecoms, and we're able to deposit money in people's phone wallets, virtual wallet. If people don't have a phone, again, because we're working with really, really low income people, they might make, less than $500 a year. We will provide a phone for them. Phones, non-smartphones are quite cheap. You can charge them off solar. It's just a few dollars. And if we're giving like $1,000 transfer, it's just a small expense. So we're mostly driven that way. Working off the phones unlocks a lot of interesting stuff. We've actually done a lot of experiments. There's some great blog posts on this, but looking just at people, how people use their phone, like when it's turned on, when it's charged, how far does it roam geographically, we can predict pretty well how poor people are and find people that way in telecom data and deliver money that way. But the main bread and butter international work is we are out in rural villages, like the poorest villages, with a whole army of field officers enrolling people at their house, doing a community meeting, explaining the program, sensitizing, but then enrolling people at their house. That's kind of our playbook for the international. As another just fun aside, the way we would pick poor villages in the early days was looking at satellite data of which percentage of the roofs of the village were made of straw versus tin. Because once you get just a little bit of income, you always do a tin roof. It's cheaper in the long run, and then you don't have water leaking on you while you're sleeping in your house. So people always do that. And if we saw a village where most of the roofs were thatch, we could know pretty reliably it was really low income. That was a village to target, and then we'd show up and work individually with people. In the US, I don't know if anyone has a tin roof here. I don't know if, Danforth dorm is looking kind of rickety since I was there, but probably not a model that's going to work. And people don't really use mobile banking that way. Even like Venmo and Zelle and Cash App, those are banking products. They're not telecom products. So typically, what we're having people do is apply to us to verify a couple things, that they're low income, that they live in the place we're working. We run that through kind of verification checks, third-party data sources, maybe interviews, whatever we need to do to feel confident that the person meets the eligibility. And then we offer people, again, just trying to meet people where they are. We offer them if they'd like to get a physical debit card, a virtual debit card, or a direct deposit into their bank account. It's like in a lot of programs, it's about 50-50. People want different options for different reasons. The debit card, maybe that's something they feel more in control of, and someone they share their bank account with someone they don't want to know that they're in the program, things like that. Maybe direct deposit because it's more secure and they're not afraid of losing the debit card. So that's kind of part of why, a government or a philanthropy who wants to do a program would work with Give Directly to do that outreach to people, to do payments like that. A little bit long-winded, but I hope that answers your question.
Did it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sydney. I'm a sophomore here. I'm curious, do you ever face the issue where you go to a village or an area and the community is very reluctant to accept your help? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, really good question, Sydney. On the international side, it happens all the time. I mean, our international staff are African natives of the countries they're in, often speak the local dialect of where they're at because we're hiring locally. But it's still a crazy trust moment to say, here's these strangers that want to give you money with no strings attached. Like the predominant thing we hear from people is like, this is a scam. I don't believe this in the US and internationally. So that's a huge challenge. People also really think there's conditions with it. So another fun anecdote early on, we realized that even though we would do these community meetings and say, we would explain why we're in their village, we'd say, oh, actually, there's no tin roofs here. So like, we know this is like a very poor place and we want to support people and then, do whatever you want. And we realized a lot of people were buying tin roofs more than we would expect. And then we did more research and realized people thought they had to buy a tin roof. That's why we came to pay for tin roofs, even though there was no conditions around it. And so then we changed our community meetings to say we have a whole process now where we'll bring a couple villagers from a nearby village that have already gone through the program. And we have this kind of grid of pictures of real people of what they've bought the money with. Like there's a tin roof, but there's also this person who bought cows as an asset. There's this person who bought a motorcycle taxi and has a business. Just explaining like the real possibility to use the money is whatever you would want. The other another related anecdote, because we want to do this really rigorous evidence, there's usually a randomization component. And early on within a village, we would run a random lottery and we would explain this to all the villagers and say, hey, there's everyone's going to apply, but half the people will get it, half won't. And then after a year, we'll come back and the next half will get it. So it's like, doesn't feel very fair to people. We didn't have money for everyone. So that's how we would kind of justify there's infinite people to give it to. So if we randomize, we can learn. We don't do that anymore. That's kind of a bad idea. It creates a lot of mistrust in the community. People are mad about it. They might refuse to participate, like you said, Cindy. And so now we randomize at the village level. So of course we can't enroll every village at the same moment, but we say, let's go to this particular district that we know are poor villages, and then pick a random sample of the villages and then enroll every single household in that village. Once we get through all of that sensitization, the community meetings, often with like an elder of the village, with neighboring villagers explaining, hey, it's not a scam and you really can spend it on whatever you want, etc. People tend to enroll and accept the program. We don't have very many who say no at that point. On the US side, one reason people might say no is it can mess with your public benefits. So if you actually are able to navigate the US safety net and you're receiving a lot of different types of government support, depending on the program we're doing, usually we're able to secure waivers in different ways. But a couple government programs don't allow that, like Social Security, for instance. So we identify who might be eligible and we call it benefits counseling. And we sit down with them individually and say, hey, you're picked, you get this money, but it probably will impact your social security benefits if your caseworker finds out, and those are really hard to get back. Like, are you sure it's your decision? Maybe you want to talk to your social security caseworker before you enroll, and if you don't want to, then we'll pull someone off the wait list.
I'll take one. Um, Thank you for all this information. You talked about the multiplier effect, the economic multiplier effect in the RX for kids. Can you talk a little bit more of some other examples, and then also unintended consequences? So a lot of programs like these over the years have also had both positive and negative unintended consequences. Can you speak to any of those also?
Yeah, good questions. Multiplier effects. So, you put a dollar somewhere and it turns into more. There's been a couple like really rigorous studies of RX kids about this, and it's pretty intuitive. There's also good research on this around SNAP benefits, the food stamp benefits. If you think about it, wealthy people, if you get an extra $1,000, you might not spend it that day. You might just throw it in your savings account. Like your day-to-day spending is pretty covered. But low-income people who are kind of stretched to the limit and have lots of things tend to spend the money right away. So the dollars get out into the community almost immediately, start circulating, and then stimulate activity. On the international side, I think people were really afraid of dropping money into villages and having a lot of inflation. And what we found in all the research is really people start businesses and there's new supply chains coming in, and it creates activity rather than just the one business that was there gets to charge more for something. All of a sudden there's three businesses, they compete, etc. So there's kind of a big research literature around that. I'll say from the donor perspective, our first anchor donor for the RX Kids program in Flint, the CS Mott Foundation, they issued like a $15 million challenge grant to bring other donors in. And I've heard their president say many times, like, we're focused on Flint. We've been here for 100 years. Like, this is what we care about. The failure mode for this cash program is we put $15 million into our local economy, into poor moms' hands who have babies. Like, I'm not going to lose sleep about that. That's the worst that could happen. There are unintended consequences. We can talk, that's not the full story. But from his perspective as a donor, it wasn't like funding, a supercomputer that would do something for poverty and then the computer doesn't turn on after you build it or whatever. You can imagine different examples. So I do think that's a big part of what motivates people. There's been some studies of RX Kids of multiplier effects around $2 or $3, which is a little bit more than what we see in the international side. $1 can usually create around $1.90 in activity, just generally. It really differs by country and things like that. Unintended consequences is a good one. I kind of hinted at a couple, like the randomization at the household level, creating community resentment and conflict, and like resentment of our program and things. So we've worked around that. Um, some of the others, one again, that funder in Flint, when I first joined Give Directly, I was like, well, if you live on this side of the city line, you don't get the money, and if you live on this side and in, you do. So that's kind of funny. Won't people like move to Flint? Won't that attract? And every Flint donor is like, we would love that. Our population's been declining for like 100 years. Like, depopulation is our biggest issue. Please move here to get the money, and we have the enough of a commitment to meet that hopeful influx of people, or maybe more babies. Maybe people start more families there. It's not a direct intention of the program, but like that's maybe a positive unintended consequence. Um, Trying to think of some negative ones in the US sense. The benefits loss is really real, and we've learned like a lot about that over 7 or 8 years, and we have a good playbook there. I've been surprised, and I think we can learn more about this, of just a lot of people when they get selected or in the program, they do not want their friends or family or anyone to know. And it ranges from, all of a sudden your family's asking you for money in some way because they know you have it, to even safety. Like in Michigan, we're in these we're at a particular node of a family, the mom, and there can be financial pressures and coercion even within a family, right? And so that's something we cross sometimes. We have a whole team that's called safeguarding, kind of more of an international development word, but where we're running these monthly surveys and saying, did anyone pressure you to take the money or ask you for a kickback if there's a staff member or something, and then we kind of spring into action if that's coming up. But yeah, it's similar to like lottery winners, right? Like there's so many stories of lottery winners who don't have the perfect happiness they expect a year or two later. That's something we've learned a little bit about.
Kate, I don't know if you've been checking the chat. Do we have any questions? We haven't been checking the chat. So are there any questions that we can take from
I've been
the,
keeping an eye on it, Barbara,
Yeah.
and I don't see any questions in the chat, but I do see a hand in the classroom.
oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Keo. In the US, it's expensive to be poor. There's structural inequality that results in just a higher cost of living proportionally. Does your organization engage in research that studies how the structural inequality reduces the effectiveness of the class structures?
Can you, I think it was Keo, can you just say the last part of that again? It broke up just a tiny
Yeah.
bit.
Do you do research that studies how structural inequality reduces the effectiveness of your class transfers?
Oh yeah, great question. Really, really good kind of systems question. And I think like we're really trying to make connections on system level impact of cash and why it matters. But I would say that might be like the weaker area of cash. A donor or your class might say we really want to fund advocacy that will change the system. We work, for instance, with a local partner in Georgia that was born out of a task force around inequality and wealth inequality in Atlanta. And we run a program specifically for Black women there. And they have this whole kind of advocacy component to their work that's just a little bit different flavor than Give Directly, but like I cheer them on and support them. I think that's really important. One of the things on the U.S., the evidence is so strong internationally for how transformative this is, and some of the U.S. research has not been quite as strong. It's still really positive, and I think RX Kids is kind of unambiguous. But like a generic cash program has had a little bit more muted results, and so I've written a couple pieces about this, saying like what might be different in the U.S. and there's a million dimensions of kind of systemic inequities, and but some are like U.S. consumers are massively indebted. Like even low income people can rack up medical debt, credit card debt, rent in arrears, and so there's a sense of when we give people cash, is it just paying back this hole that they're in? That's probably because of these systemic forces, and is that muting some of the impact? Um, the other thing is in international context, and I don't really think any of us in this room would trade places and be in one of these like desperately poor communities where often the main thing people say is they eat twice a day instead of once a day once they get the cash. That's like a core constant refrain. But when people get the cash, they tend to start small businesses. They get out of this really precarious wage economy where they're showing up at construction sites or just subsistence farming, and they're able to buy a bicycle and be a bicycle taxi driver or kind of courier or something like that. And I think when I think of trying to put myself in the footsteps of someone in the US with cash, I can't think of a lot of small businesses that I could just start with, a couple $1,000s and turn that into a sustainable living wage for me and my family. It's just so expensive here, and there's a much different ecosystem. There aren't brands in these villages selling fast food. You can start a food business and like maybe succeed and pick your family up from this really low floor. The other thing that I think we have to be honest about is our transfers are not that much compared to the international. We're giving like a year's salary internationally all at once upfront as a lump transfer. And the US programs, RX Kids over 13 months is $7,500. It's not nothing. It's really appreciated. But I think the equivalent we should be saying the federal poverty line for a family of two is like probably around 25 grand. Maybe we should be giving moms 25 grand up front, right? And we have some programs that are doing massive upfront transfers, but broadly we haven't done a lot of that. And part of it is because I don't think we're gonna necessarily convince policymakers to do that tomorrow. But if we can show how to make some of these programs a little better, maybe that's a chance at kind of wider systems change. I feel like I could talk to you for like a half hour about this. It's a really good question.
Thank you.
We do have a question from the chat. I'm just going to read it to you. It says, "Hi, my name is Hayden Gold, and I'm a former Baylor University Philanthropy Lab student. We love our bears. There are a lot of causes that Give Directly could focus on, both internationally and domestically. What criteria do you consider when picking where and who to give to?"
Yeah, I love that question, Hayden. We have kind of this internal process that can be a pain in my butt, but I really think is good, and other orgs should have it, which is how we get approval to do a new project. So me as the country director getting sign off from our board and executives. And there's some defaults in there where we say, if you don't meet this criteria, it's a flag and you need to explain why you're not meeting that. So one example is how many dollars will go to the recipient out of the overall program budget. If you're not above 80% on that, that's a problem. And the board, even if you have a donor lined up who wants to do something really specific, but it would cost so much to deliver that only half would go to recipients and half would be other direct costs, we'll say no to it, which is rare. I think some nonprofits don't quite have that efficiency focus, but it goes to all the things we've talked about today. And then other examples are, being able to make it universal within a village. If there's some reason why it would have to only go to, just people over 50 or something like that, we don't like that because of the community conflict. So we tend towards that. But the North Star is accelerating the end of extreme poverty, which is people living on, there's a kind of global measure of that. It was $2.15 a day. It just got updated to be a little bit higher based on inflation. And then there's kind of infinite demand. So we actually were expanding pretty rapidly right when I joined. We were starting fledgling programs in India, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Bangladesh. And we decided actually we were stretched a little bit too thin. And there's still lots and lots of people in the places we are at. And it's easier for us to add the next person in Kenya who's, just as deserving as someone in any country with lower operational costs rather than this wide country footprint. And so we contracted a little bit. So we're actually in fewer countries now, even though we're delivering more money than ever. So there's kind of like an operational criteria within it as well. The last thing I'll say, Hayden, and then happy to do another question. The core thing is just supporting people in extreme poverty in any way, but we're following the evidence that cash can be even better for like moms and babies. You heard all about RX Kids. In the fall, we got some research results from Kenya where families, expectant moms that got our standard transfer, nothing special about moms in any way, just the moms in the villages that everyone got it in. Infant mortality dropped 48%. Like 50% less child infant deaths in these villages because of this relatively small amount of cash. So now we're trying to we're building that evidence to say, okay, there's something really there. Is that the right amount? Should we do programs just for moms and babies? What's driving that? So that we kind of follow the evidence that way, but always with cash at the center. So I hope it's a good question, and it's kind of a live question. We change that year over year as we try to just do the most that we can.
I have a question for you just from here at the Philanthropy Lab side. What's on the horizon? What do you see upcoming for Give Directly, both US or international?
Yeah, I thank you, and it is a super exciting time. Like I said, on the U.S. side, ARC's kids, 1 in 4 babies in Michigan will be eligible this year based on this massive new state infusion of money. So I'm super excited about that. I'm a little nervous. We got to scale things up pretty fast and make sure we are showing up with kind of dignity and care for all the moms that are going to be eligible. That's super exciting. And then our disaster response, we'll keep doing responses to more and more disasters. I just got an alert. We're tracking this icy storm, and tomorrow we will see what things look like and if we need to mobilize for a cash response. On the international side, we have a big goal of a couple kind of big bets, I think our CEO would use as a term. One is we want to keep evolving our emergency responses where we can respond anywhere in the world and have money in people's pockets within 5 days of a disaster striking. Now we beat that sometimes, and sometimes we do cash before the disaster arrives, which is really cool, and you can find a blog post on it. But that would be pretty different than how the emergency response system works in the world today. It's often a little bit slower if you think about how hard it is to get into places after a disaster. But we're excited about that. The other one, in Malawi, which is our kind of biggest country of operations outside of the US, just at the end of last year, we announced Canva, which is a tech company, a $100 million partnership with Canva to lift people out of poverty in Malawi, where we work. We want to raise, like, it will be a few $1 billion. It's still a little bit out there, but we think if we can raise it, we could lift every person out of extreme poverty in Malawi, a country scale universal program. And so we have hundreds of $1 million stacked towards that. We have a long way to go, but that's kind of one of our big ambitious bets that our CEO is really focused on. And then it opens up this whole new range of like, what happens in a country when everyone is above that like threshold living dollars a day, and how does the economy change, and what does that mean for health, education, whatever. So that's a huge one that I don't know if it'll happen this year, but we're trying to work toward it.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. I'm not sure if there are any more questions in the classroom right now, or if anyone would like to add something additional to the chat.
Dustin, while we're looking at that, we have a few more minutes, and I had a couple questions about decision making. You touched on that a little bit in terms of how the board strategizes the big picture, and then then shares that with the implementation people, right? And how that decision making process works. And the other is we've had a lot of shifts in our national government, our federal government. USAID closed down pretty much completely. How have some of those national and international closures and grant stoppage, has affected both your decision making and how you see moving forward? And also from a policy perspective, how is your board and or staff involved in some of those policy advocacy changes, perhaps?
Yeah, really good set of kind of interconnected questions. On the board, like decision making and org strategy, we have a set of values. Number one is recipients first, like do what's right for recipients. Even in the day to day, like if I'm trying to think through a staffing question on my team and I go to my boss for help, she'll say like, what's recipients first? What will trickle into the best impact for the people we serve? And I find that so clarifying and like so energizing to work at an organization that makes that tangible. In like really practically, we're in our annual planning right now. There's kind of this bottom up and top down approach to what we're going to do. And the board and the CEO set like a broad strategy, and some of our like, they'll stack rank the priorities. Like this is priority number one, and it is a bigger priority than number two. And like, here's the 6. And when in doubt, like work on these things. But also the countries then set their own goals that roll up into those. So it's kind of a coherent piece. I will always have a goal of raising a certain amount of money and delivering a certain amount of money to people. The delivering the dollars is the really big one. And it's not the value of all the projects, it's the dollars into people's pockets that we track. And, my feet are held to the fire on in a really good way. You're totally right. So I said USAID earlier. It basically doesn't exist anymore. That was a massive anchor of the global foreign aid ecosystem, and it's super sad. There's a ton of reporting on this of just like what tangibly this meant for all sorts of people around the world. Certainly impacted Give Directly. In December of 2024, the head of USAID was at a ribbon cutting for our work in Morocco, and they had just made a public commitment to benchmarking to cash effectiveness and cost effectiveness. And by the end of January, that entire office we had to close down. The government cut it all, and we actually weren't even sure if we would get paid back for what we had. The contracts are reimbursable. So it was a very dark moment. Lots and lots of international actors folded. I think at the time about 30% of our budget was USAID. So we were fortunate, and honestly, in a lot of ways, because we could keep other programs running. We did an emergency fundraise for the people who had already enrolled in programs that were USAID funded, basically to make them whole, to say, even though the funder of this, the US government, me and you in some abstract sense walked away from this commitment we made to you, this promise, like we found enough private philanthropy to fill that gap. And then, other people we were intending to enroll, we weren't able to because we lost that money. Despite that, last year Give Directly grew quite a bit from the previous year, and I think that's just a testament to our model, our leadership, the good work we're doing, the evidence. But it is kind of a dire moment to think about the broader like foreign aid flows and all the nonprofits and philanthropies that are part of that. On the US side, there's also been a ton of attacks on the safety net. Some of the core ways we support low-income people are government programs. We're more mature, we're a richer country. And so a lot of those are going to affect, actually right now, I was on the phone with the Greater Chicago Food Depository last week, a kind of major food bank who wants to do a cash program because they know all the people they support who normally get food stamps. There's a bunch that are going to get cut off shortly. So there's some rallying around the moment, but I think philanthropy in a rich country can't replace what the government does. And it feels a little bit like just on a bad day, a drop in the bucket. It's really important to the families you reach, but the magnitude of the government stepping back from these kind of commitments is a bummer, to say the least. One bright point for me is that RX Kids program is funded by a mix of state, federal, and local money, and it's bipartisan. We have sitting members of both parties who are in the media saying, we love this program. This is the right way to do services. Conservative think tank in Michigan had an op-ed, and the headline was like, Milton Friedman would love RX Kids. And then, the liberal governor of Michigan is like, sends a little letter to every baby that says, RX Kids, this is our investment in you as a Michigander. So that is like a tiny bright point. There's still critics of that program. If you can believe it, moms and babies and reducing NICU stays, it's controversial in our current political climate. So it makes me nervous of how we come together. But yeah, in terms of the policy side, we do a lot more on the international work. So we do a lot of like briefings with the State Department, with members of Congress, with legislation trying to say within what we're allowed to do as a 501c3 nonprofit, but like here's what really matters. And then I think the best we can do is just release the research, the transparency around numbers, like show what's possible, and hope that emboldens some of the policy folks. Did that cover all your questions, Barbara?
So, and I think, Kate, if Dustin can stay on a few more minutes with us, and then I think we're going to close down the national conversation.
Yes, we just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today, and for the people that will be watching this later. Thank you for watching that. But biggest thanks to Dustin for your time today, and also to Mason and Barbara for all of your organizational opportunities and everything that you did to make this possible. We are grateful, and this was a really beneficial conversation. And we will be in touch with the next Philanthropy Lab Speaker Series information as that arises. We're going to end the event now.
Thank you so much, Kate.